Joining me now to discuss Dr. Katheryn Russ, a UC Davis economics professor and an expert in international trade. Good morning to you, Doctor. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate you doing this. President's big speech last night, a lot of focus there on the justices about his tariff policies. Your takeaways from the address?
Well, with regard to the tariff remarks, my immediate reaction was, okay, he's leaning into tariffs, so they're not going to be daunted by the Supreme Court striking down one type of tariff, which was under the type that the Supreme Court struck down. We were getting about so more than half of our tariff revenue, so it was a pretty big change. So it sounds like they're going to go with new kinds of tariffs and really lean into that, to the degree that the president also mentioned he wishes to replace the income tax with tariff revenue. And so that provoked my second big reaction, which was, wow, how high would the tariff have to be to substantially replace the income tax?
And his strategy is, of course, shifting right now because the Supreme Court struck down most of his tariffs, and now he's doing this alternative tariff under a different law. Like, how is that all going to shake out? Because he clearly has no interest getting Congress involved here.
So in terms of the tariffs where the White House is asserting authority to levy tariffs, there are three different types. Two of them have held up pretty well under court challenges before. So those are the ones levied under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, and then the Section 232. So 301 is unfair trade practices, 232 is national defense reasons. But then there's this Section 122 from that 1974 Trade Act, and that one hasn't been tested really heavily in court before, like the other two. And that's where we get this 15% global tariff that you mentioned, that basically is temporarily at least replacing the tariffs the Supreme Court struck down. And it's really, that introduces a lot of uncertainty. We don't know if they're going to hold up, and they're really big, right? So it's not a small pilot.
I see two words a lot: uncertainty and confusion. So when it comes to California businesses and just the folks at home watching right now, what type of impacts could they see on a practical level?
Well, we'll probably see continued hikes in prices. So right now we see about 24% of the tariff increases seeping through into consumer prices. But even more broadly, you know, we're collecting about $280 billion a year in tariffs, and the U.S. buyers are shouldering, 80–90% of that burden right now. So that comes out to a pretty hefty bill if you average it out per household.
And there was an issue that the White House was quick to say was not addressed by the Supreme Court, and that was the potential in billions of dollars in tariff refunds that might get tied up in court. How do you see that playing out right now? Yeah,
this is really unclear, because in one case, it sounds like the Justice Department was claiming that the tariffs, of course, would be refunded. But then in other cases, it sounded like they were reserving the right to contest refunds. So it's really hard to know how that's going to play out. And overarching all of this is the hole that this can put in the federal deficit if this tariff revenue.
Why is that? Why a hole in the deficit?
Well, because the tariffs that the Supreme Court struck down, they were estimated to provide about $1.5 trillion in revenues over the next 10 years. So if suddenly those aren't available, and we're scrambling to replace them with this untested tariff, the Section 122 tariff, and that doesn't hold up in court, what does that mean for the federal budget? That's got to be a concern on Congress's mind.
Big picture here, impact for focusing just on the small business side. If an owner of a small business here in California is watching, what would be your message? Trying to wrap your head around all of this tariff stuff.
Yeah, it's really important to be agile right now with your supply chain. A lot of businesses had just figured out how to adapt their supply chains to the Emergency Economic Powers Act tariffs that were just struck down. So now I'd have to shift to the global 15% tariff going on in place of that, and then also wondering, well, how long is that going to be in place? We also can expect more tariffs to come in under unfair trade practices claims, so that's Section 301, under the National Defense Claim, Section 232. So right now, I think
so many different threats.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see where it could be a source of confusion. I do thank you so much for coming on such short notice. We appreciate you doing this. Dr. Katheryn Russ, UC Davis economics professor. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.